Like, I personally would love to be in the writer's room for a show like Saturday Night Live, or even something like The Daily Show. Like, sitting around, kicking around ideas for what is this show going to be? And like, where's the punchline in all of the buildup? Seems like fun to me. Like, that, if I could pick my dream job, on the list would be comedy writer.
Yeah, that's a good job. There's a book, I forget. I think it's like Shut Up. It's like called Shut Up TV or something. It's about the first like the golden years of The Simpsons.
Mm.
And when you're talking on one of your extended rants, I promise I'll look it up for the listener and tell them what it is. But it's interesting because I think there's like a quote from Conan O'Brien in it about being a comedy writer in The Simpsons, especially in the early days, because people would often say like, wow, that's exactly what you said. That's my dream job. Wouldn't it be so cool to like be a part of these shows when they're getting off the ground, like when they're getting, you're making something great. Sorry for the stutter. And the issue is when you're doing that, 1 hour would be cool. But a lot of those comedy writers are working 12-hour days.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
You're not getting paid much. You're eating terrible food, so your body feels bad. There's constant arguments about money because some of the people in the room are making a ton of money. Most of the people in the room might be able to afford an apartment. And there's parts of it that are fun, but a lot of it is just grueling and banging your head against a wall.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily mean this is the thing I would love to do if it required me to be able to put food on the table, send my kid to college, all that stuff we care about. I mean, just like in a vacuum, if I'm doing a thing for the sake of, like, for the love of the game. Like, I would love to be a professional football player for about 3 Sundays. And then once my body felt broken, I wouldn't want to do this anymore. Like, being a comedy writer seems to me like something I could do for years, money aside, and actually enjoy it. Like, writing for a stand-up comedian seems like fun too, because you get to see the audience react to the thing that you came up with and enjoy the response that you, almost the same way that the comedian themselves standing on the stage gets the laugh.
Yeah, but at that point, just do the jokes. I mean, there's a reason.
Maybe, but there's certain things that only sound funny coming from you, right? Like Neil Brennan wrote for Dave Chappelle for years, but Dave Chappelle says so many controversial things that there's no way Neil Brennan could be standing on the stage and say that thing and get the same laugh. You know what I mean?
I understand that, but then Neil Brennan's also able to do stand-up on his own and do some pretty incredible specials.
But half the people listening to this are saying, who the hell is Neil Brennan?
Are you? Neil Brennan, good
so.
Stand-up comic. He was, if Malcolm was kind enough to provide context, comic. Neil Brennan was the other half of the Chappelle Show.
But it was called The Chappelle Show.
But it was called Chappelle Show, which
not
is
the Neil and Dave Show.
And he got to the right amount of famous, where you get to be niche famous. People know who you are. And then also a lot of his stand-up does deal with significant mental health struggles. And that is actually, that's something I saw in stand-up, where it definitely is, if you get a good joke over in a big crowd, it is a drug. And it's awesome. And there is a reason that so many stand-up comedians end up being addicts. I don't have
on that high note.
Yeah, you want to do the show? All right. I have thoughts on gold. Shocker. Malcolm has thoughts on a short report against his beloved SoFi. Who would ever go after that company when they've been so good to him? And then also, I think this is a positive story. States are starting to push back on iGaming. I've got some thoughts on that. Let's get into it. So so much is going on with the world right now, and I know every show is saying that, but it's one of the things that I think is interesting is what's happening with gold. And you would think that one of the promises of gold is that kind of when the world unravels, this is a safe haven asset. there are more guns. It would make sense that people would want to buy more gold. And yet it's starting to fall off even as the world unravels. I saw this in some CNBC reporting from a chief investment officer at a wealth partners group, basically saying that we're seeing a drag in gold because interest rates are increasing across the world and real rates are rising, and therefore that has been a drag. And Malcolm, I think it's interesting because there's sort of a fancy explanation and a little bit of a greasy explanation. And the second one is what I believe more. So one thought is there's a complex interest rate trade going on around precious metals that's falling off because of the third hit in a pinball machine causing the price of gold to go down. My theory on what's happening with gold right now is that the retail trade has fallen off since it's gone to oil. And we're seeing that in mentions on Wall Street Bets, where there was a while where gold and silver and even corn were being talked about all the time. Now it's oil and Micron and a little bit of Nvidia. So as someone who does those debate financial talk shows, where are you at? I did two. I kind of led the jury a little bit, but I think I think we're seeing the retail fall off a little bit here.
Yeah, ironically, that was one of the topics of discussion during my financial markets debate show yesterday. The idea that retail investors are disappearing. And because, sorry, I forget which outlet it was. I want to say it was JP Morgan Chase, but I'm not 100% sure. But one of the big banks put out a piece of research on their own customers that basically pointed out that just from a week over week basis, retail trading was down a whopping 15%, which is pretty significant if you consider that retail has been the group that has really been leading the markets since the bottom in 2022, November 2022. And institutional investors, even though roughly 80% of all money invested in the capital markets is by bigger institutions, institutional investors had been following retail for the last 3 years. And so 1 week does not make an entire, movement, but it is interesting that every time we've had a significant dip in the markets over the last 3 years, it was retail investors first. It was the Robinhood crowd that stepped in and bought the dip and kept on buying the dip and kept on buying the dip. But also, if you look at Robinhood stock, which is a good harbinger of where retail investors are because they make all of their money based on the flow of trading by retail investors, that stock has fallen off a cliff over the last 3 months, I guess, the start of 2026. So it is interesting. I do think they go together, but it could be nothing because what goes up must come down. It didn't make sense for gold to go from like $3,000 to $6,000 basically in a straight line unchecked. And so maybe it's just naturally taking a breather.
Yeah. And I still believe in the fundamentals of gold to the extent there are fundamentals over the long term. This may be a situation where I pick up. I've been talking about slowly adding over a long period of time because it was skyrocketing, but also, as I've said on the show, the demand for gold fundamentally changed in an important way over
How long
my
is
lifetime.
A long time, though? Like, I feel like we as human people, especially in the world of poly markets and Uber Eats and everything else that's instantaneous, a lot of times people just don't have the temperament to be adding dollar cost averaging over a long period of time.
Oh, when we said, 2 to 3 years is your long-term time horizon, I think for something like gold, for me, that's like a 10-year investment at least.
But how long do I take to buy it? I'm saying, like, because there's always the knee-jerk reaction to just plunk the money down in one chunk, buy the investment and let it ride. Because we've gotten so used to seeing stocks go up like Micron or like Nvidia or, anything else. And so the idea is I put my entire bet in action now. But I'm emphasizing this because I think your point about gold specifically, it's not something that you want to be trying to time perfectly the right movement because it's meant to be sort of a boring category if you look at a 10-year chart.
Yeah, maybe 5% then. Like, it's not 100% all in. It's just baby steps. as our friend Dave Ramsey would say. This is a baby step, not an all-in bet. But yeah, I think what's happening that may be interesting is that with the previous dips that you described since 2022, one of them was like a Japanese debt trade unwinding. There were some different fighting. There were events that I think retail traders could quickly see through. This Iran thing, that's one you can't really see through it. I don't think a reasonable person can say, I know the timeline on this conflict and I know where it goes.
Here's where I stand on this. I think the president is desperately trying to figure out what his exit is going to be from this war. And I think he's come to realize, or I should say also he and the rest of the people in his cabinet around him have come to realize that it's actually not just up to them. They came to this party with a friend, Israel, and Israel drove the car. And so now they're at the mercy of, when does Israel actually want to leave this party too? And that's the part that's sticking. Because I think genuinely Donald Trump thought when he said, I'll have this thing over in one day, he literally meant, I will have this thing over in one day. If you just look at how much money was spent and how many projectiles were launched at Iran in one day, they genuinely thought on Sunday they were going to have this thing done. So I think the realization that this isn't just a blip on the radar is sinking in for a lot of people, investors and also government officials.
Yes. We are part of the war is now in Lebanon. Did you think we were getting into that? Did we think it was going to expand beyond there? And I guess it's not like the Iraq war or the war in Afghanistan really had an effect on financial markets. And in some ways, especially around 2008, those wars were kind of a stimulus where it was the government pumping money into some labor, a lot of defense companies. And I'm not saying that from a moral way, that is from a narrative way. This was a way that the government pumped money into the system.
This is a podcast about money. We understand.
This one feels different from those conflicts.
This time is different? Is that what you're saying?
This time is a little different. This time is a little different, and this time is a little bit of the same, which is that one of my sources in the NPR story I did on this, Linda Bilmez, she's a public finance professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, and she studies the way that the U.S. has spent on wars since 9/11. And one of the things she mentioned to me is that for pretty much every single war, not only Afghanistan and Iraq in the post 9/11 wars, for pretty much every single war throughout history, the leaders who enter it are overly optimistic about the timeline and overly optimistic that the damage will be minimal from it. And so in that way, I would say this time may not be different. As you said, President Trump thought it would be extraordinarily quick, the same way that he was able to, pop into Venezuela, grab the leader and get out. It turns out that that's much more difficult in a different country with about 90 million people and an entrenched leadership without a real opposite political party. We got here from gold, Malcolm.
Well, since we're here, I want to stay here for a second because this is actually interesting to me. I was reading in Bloomberg yesterday. They did a breakdown of what the first 6 days of this war actually cost in real dollars. $11 billion. So we're supposed to be getting more fiscally responsible. The whole reason Elon Musk showed up in DC with the chainsaw and ripped out parts of the government that we didn't even know what they did and all that was in the name of saving money. And now we're seeing Patriot Defender missiles that cost like $4 million each just being thrown willy-nilly up into the air. And just in the first day of the war, I was talking about like how much damage had been done and they thought they could get it done immediately. 800 interceptor missiles in the opening week of the war were fired at Iran. That's $800 million in one pop. So just from the standpoint of, to your point, how much money gets made when bullets start flying, these companies, RTX, Lockheed Martin, like they make these heavy artillery weapons. You're right. They're getting pretty significant chunks of money infused at one time into the economy, but you don't feel it everywhere is the way I want to say that. So it's an unequal stimulus. So where you're talking about like during the Iraq War and Gulf War and everything else, like, yes, there was money that was made behind it and people's pockets got lined, but it's a very unequal distribution of capital.
I literally just did a story called "How Much is the Iran War Costing Us?" One of the first lines is, over the first 6 days of the Iran war, an estimated $11.3 billion was charged to the public purse. You didn't check out my story? You quoted Bloomberg?
You didn't tell me.
You want that?
You didn't tell me.
Okay.
Is this you who wrote this for Bloomberg? Sorry, I should have given you
I did.
attribution.
It's a common estimate that came out from the Pentagon. The reason it was interesting to me is because there was it's the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They first published an estimate on the cost of the Iran war to be about $900 million per day. And then the Pentagon said, no, it was closer to $1.8 billion per day. So it was 2x the estimate of the first days of the war. And the reason for that is they were firing more of the expensive weaponry that you just referred to. Tomahawk missiles are really expensive.
Well, also the launcher, the Patriot Interceptor itself is $1 billion each. And they already spent 3 or 4 of them. Now,
I will say the first days are significantly more expensive than the later days. And that's because, for now at least, the US established air superiority over Iran. So versus launching a precision-guided, hyper-expensive intercontinental ballistic missile, you can drop stuff out of a plane, which is significantly cheaper. However, when the Pentagon releases that estimate, it's not like they break down the costs. So it's hard to say what, are we counting all of the fuel? Because in one of the first estimates, they don't include necessarily every single little bit of cost. And then the bigger point from the reporting is that these numbers don't really reflect the economic cost of war, because like the physical damage of going to war, like the injuries it causes, the economic cost cannot be summed up in a daily figure. You look at something like the Gulf War, which is a relatively short conflict. The US still spends billions of dollars every single year in veterans benefits for those soldiers. Because when you send people over there, they get injuries that can last until the rest of their lives. Right now, the US has over $7 trillion in accrued disability benefits just owed to soldiers. That's not healthcare. That's just the VA disability benefits owed to soldiers who were injured, hurt by serving for our country. And so one of the things is, go ahead.
Active duty pay, right? Before we ever even get into the injuries, and before, like, they've sent 2 carrier strike groups into the Middle East initially trying to, show a force, or whether it was actually meant to be like placing strategic pieces because they knew that this launch was going to happen. But either way, that's tens of thousands of service members that are now in an active war zone who are receiving active duty pay because they got all the planes on the carriers. They've got, all the services on the carriers. So all that stuff adds up too, even if they never did launch the missiles in the first place.
And I think that is captured. I think that's captured in the budget. If I had to guess, I think it's captured in the budget.
Still, also the DOD has asked Congress for an extra $200 billion, which means they don't plan to go home anytime soon.
Oh, great question. Why do they need to do that?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's not. Go ahead.
As a part of when the U.S., if you think about this, for people who follow regular businesses, this will not make sense. Because a regular business has inventory that it will write down pretty much every single year. With this with the launch of a lot of the missiles we just talked about, like a Tomahawk missile, the way the Pentagon budgets for that is that they essentially expect that none of those will be used over the course of a year. And then when they launch them, they immediately come in as an unbudgeted cost. So that's why Hegseth has to go to Congress immediately and say, you know what, even though we've had, we have almost I think it's almost $1 trillion budget at the Defense Department. These missiles that we're spending, that doesn't come from our end at all. So we immediately need more funding. That's how you get a lot of those emergency authorizations. One more thing. President Trump earlier this year asked for a 50% increase to the Pentagon's annual budget, I think going from close to $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. Wow. So one of the other economic costs to watch from this is we are doing all of this deficit spending, is that ask for many Congress people will be more palatable with the backdrop of a live war. He might not get everything that he wants, but when you're looking at these economic costs, let's say the Pentagon gets, because of this, a 10 to 25% budget increase this year, it's going to be really hard to claw that back in future years, because once money goes into the Pentagon, it can kind of be a black hole.
This episode is sponsored by Capital Area Planning Group. Capital Area Planning Group is a fiduciary wealth management firm that specializes in helping high net worth individuals and families navigate the complexities that come along with managing concentrated stock options, multiple income streams, and an ever-changing tax code. While our team of certified financial planners are well-versed in all things personal finance, our areas of expertise include equity compensation, estate planning, and multi-year tax planning. At Capital Area Planning Group, we believe in pricing transparency. That's why our fees are posted on our website, right alongside the various services we perform on behalf of our clients throughout the year. If you're tired of receiving the same cookie-cutter advice from your financial advisor, then don't wait. Reach out to us today at capgllc.com to experience a better approach to wealth management. Again, that web address is www.capgllc.com.
You want to go to the next topic? You want to talk about
let's go to the next topic. I will just end this by saying this. Anyone who is investing dollars today based on the expectation that victory will be declared when we wake up, in the next 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, is probably making a miscalculation. So do what you would like. I think just looking at the data that we just ran through and looking at just the way this thing has been playing out, it is unlikely that we will be able to get untangled from this whole thing before the month of March is over.
Bold 10-day prediction from Malcolm Etheridge on the show that war may not be wrapped up in 10 days. My final thought on this is that I think this is starting to become a manifestation as well of the Sell America trade, which is that as the U.S. did not get buy-in from this attack outside of, or maybe Israel got buy-in from the U.S. Let's not break down that discussion for too long. However, as you're seeing right now with America saying we need our allies to help us with the Strait of Hormuz, and many of the allies are sort of saying, hey, you didn't ask us about this. You broke it. Now you got to buy it. I think that is also sort of representative of possibly a longer term trend. Let's get to Muddy Waters and SoFi. Muddy Waters, they're a short research firm. They went after your beloved SoFi, a online bank loan type of thing. And they basically said that SoFi's adjusted earnings are too high by roughly 90% because of financial engineering. Three things happening here. Number one, they say that SoFi resold loans that they were about to charge off, and that makes their books look a lot better because their net charge off is lower. They're saying we have a much better loan portfolio than the reality may suggest. Muddy Waters said that SoFi uses a discount rate for student loans, saying what is the future value and how are we going to price that in at a rate that is lower than a U.S. Treasury. This is important because a U.S. Treasury is allegedly a risk-free loan, whereas lending to a student borrower is going to be a much higher risk loan. So you would expect a much higher return for those loan dollars. And Muddy Waters is saying, why are you having such a small discount rate there? And then also, SoFi keeps issuing equity to make up for the company's losses on loans. Malcolm, some pretty heavy accusations in there.
It was aggressive.
Yeah.
It was aggressive. First of all, you called this an online bank type of thing. SoFi
They do
is
online loans. They're
a legitimate player in the financial services sector. Like, this fintech platform is a legitimate name. Let's start there. But to your point, I wanna first couch all of this in saying you are accurate in referring to it as my beloved SoFi, because it is my largest personal holding. So this actually matters to me. Also, it's my largest personal holding because of how much it has grown since I initially started buying shares. So I first started buying shares when it was in the 4s, 5s, and 6s. And now it's trading at something like $17 a share, depending on how the story is affecting it at the time you're listening to this. So it does actually matter to me for a whole bunch of reasons. But when I read short seller reports, the first thing that I want to find is what is the incentive to the person doing the writing. And they sort of made it clear that they have shorts against this name and they stand to profit significantly if the market has a negative reaction to SoFi stock. So that's one piece of it. Separately from that, 90% of their adjusted earnings being malarkey is a bit aggressive. So I don't know, because I haven't done the same analysis that Muddy Waters purports to have done in this company's individual loan packages and the loans they service versus the ones they sell and that sort of thing. But I think 90% of any publicly traded company's adjusted earnings being Michigat's is a very big claim. So 3 things happened following this that I actually did appreciate from the standpoint of a shareholder. One, company came out immediately and denied the allegations. It's kind of standard, but even included, we're exploring legal action against this company. 2, the CEO came out and bought shares with his own personal capital immediately, just as a show of support, basically saying, I'm putting my money where my mouth is. So he bought about $500,000 worth of shares the day this got released, but he had just bought $1 million worth of shares a few days before. And Anthony Noto has actually been a very good timer of his purchases of this stock. It's one of the reasons I kept accumulating as I noticed that he himself was buying additional shares with his own personal capital. Keep in mind, he stands to gain a pay package of something like $100 million, mostly in the form of SoFi stock, based on his performance by the end of this calendar year. So he doesn't really need to double and triple and quadruple down on his position because so much of his personal capital is tied to this company. So it does make you feel good as a shareholder. I want to say all of that before saying I do not know yet what the deal is here. It's not enough smoke for me to be concerned, and say like, oh my God, it's time to sell shares, because the company is growing. They have been growing their member count, right? So 13, 14 million members on the platform. The year before there was 10 million. So they are growing substantially. And also they have sort of a land and expand type of approach similar to CrowdStrike, where once they get someone into the flywheel, they're not only offering traditional banking and banking services, they've also got you from a lending standpoint. They've also, personal loans, home loans, credit cards, student loans, and then they've even got investment options now. And then they folded back in crypto and stable coins in the last 12 months. And so I think there is a lot here on the platform that should get you excited as a shareholder. But I also think that it's important to pay attention when short reports like this come out and start raising questions to see if people tack on to it and additional questions start to show up. So that's basically what I'm looking for here. Is this smoke leading to fire, or is this smoke for the sake of we stand the profit if we can take this company down 12, $10-12 per share, because that's where our shorts really make the most money.
I have several questions. Good Malcolm rant. That was one of your better Malcolm rants. I also don't know. I don't know if it is common in this industry to sell off bad loans before they go bad. I don't know if that is a SoFi only problem. I don't know if that is something that is widespread. I've seen some different, like SoFi said this is a common industry practice. I don't know. I also don't own the stock. To your point that it is good to see Anthony Noto buying shares and that he doesn't need to because he has $100 million pay package coming down the line. In this situation, I think he needs to buy shares. What happens if this short report comes out and he's not, you're not the only one that's looking at his share purchases on the open market. What happens if he doesn't do that? The thing tanks even more in my view. So I don't know how much of a vote of confidence that is versus a strategy, right? But also this is a company that I've been sitting on the sidelines for quite some time. One thing in the response, I personally found the response from SoFi a little weak, a little odd, where they just basically said, we dispute all of the allegations in this short report and we're exploring legal action against Muddy Waters, right? Also importantly, they did mention that Muddy Waters said that they were going to cover their short pretty much right after this report was released, right? Mm-hmm. So if they were in a spot where, and this is a little bit like the latest season of Industry, if you're watching that.
Mm-hmm. I thought the timing was interesting.
If they thought this was actual fraud going on, you would expect them to hang on to that short for a much larger period of time, because functionally the company should go, if you're lying about 90% of your earnings, shouldn't that create a pretty massive sustained downturn for the company?
To your point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to go in one different direction. So if you have something related to it,
I just didn't love, well, you don't understand our business, right? Like that part just was not robust enough to me, right? Like if I ask somebody, why do you own Micron? And they say, well, because you need memory, and memory is memory. And like, why wouldn't you want to own Micron? And I say, well, why would I need to own Micron when I could own far cheaper companies that are also in the memory business? Oh, well, you just don't understand the company. That feels like a Wall Street Bets Reddit argument response, not necessarily like a full. And maybe it's just because the folks at SoFi were like, this isn't worth our time. We're too grown up for this, and you are some, small children nipping at our heels. Maybe that was the feeling internally, and that's why they responded that way. But it didn't seem robust enough to me to really like smack it down.
Every single Bitcoin bull telling people you need to study Bitcoin.
Oh, do your own research.
You got to do your own research. Which sometimes that is true. People do need to do their own research.
Yeah, but reflexively as an answer, it sounds like you don't really know either.
So with Anthony Noto, they have a very short sort of response to this from the official SoFi communication page. And then he's going on X and he's retweeting these FinTwit accounts breaking down the short report. And my thought is, that should be coming from you, dude. Like, you should not be looking for at top secret stocks with an emoji of a guy shushing. So it's at top secret stocks and then a shh for the 3 people watching this video. And Anthony Noto is saying like, yes, this is, let me elevate that. No, the main message should be coming from you. And then I looked into one of the responses he retweeted, and even the person who did this breakdown of why he or she didn't like the short report, someone responds basically that they didn't like SoFi's response, and he, in the anonymous Twitter account, goes, yeah, I agree, it's weak. And this is part of what Anthony Noto is reposting. So I think that to me was a little less impressive, where I'm like, come on, man, you should if you're letting others break this down, you should be willing to do that on your end as well.
But there's not a ton of analyst coverage on SoFi anyway, like from a Wall Street perspective. There is coverage. There's a lot more than there was when I first got into the stock, but it's still not a stock that enough of the street cares about. And so maybe that's also why this hasn't made as much noise, it's just not a company that enough of the analyst community cares to dig into and to do that analysis on. Because in if this was JP Morgan Chase, there would have been 17 professional analysts who did their own digging after this short report came out to either confirm or smack down the report of a short. And in this case, we didn't get that. Or we haven't so far.
It's you and Jim Cramer. I think Jim Cramer. I forget if
I'm in
still
good
likes
company.
SoFi. There you go. This story actually is making me feel somewhat positive, even though it can get to a dark place. Before I get into this topic, I do want to do a trigger warning that at some point in this topic about online gambling and iGaming, I will discuss suicide briefly, because that is part of the gambling addiction story. So I'll put a timestamp of when we get to the next story if we have time, but that is something that I think is an important part of the story. So there you go. There's your warning. iGaming, which is, for people who don't know, sports betting. You know what sports betting is on your phone. Now those apps want to be able to put slots, blackjack, and craps on your phone. 7 states allow this. So instead of DraftKings just having a sports book, now they can have a full casino on your phone. 7 states have legalized this. However, it is much slower going. And now Virginia and Massachusetts have shelved an iGaming bill. Ohio has done something similar-ish, but it's a little weird since they allow a different version of an online casino. But I think this is fundamentally interesting because you're seeing the gaming lobby using the exact same arguments they used state by state to legalize sports betting, which is, we need to legalize this. It brings in tax revenue, and the people who want to do it are just going to do it in offshore books anyway. And I think
old Chris Christie argument.
I think more state legislators are going, wait a second, if we popularize this and we allow these companies to really advertise, you can play slot machines whenever you want, wherever you are, legally. And we kind of, not implicitly endorse, but we are constantly bringing your attention to it with billboards, television advertisements, YouTube ads. Then that creates a lot of collateral damage. And now Virginia and Massachusetts, both of them were supposed to vote on allowing iGaming in their state, and both of those states have shelved the bill. So I'm looking at this, Malcolm, and I'm starting to think there is maybe a little bit of a societal swing back on widespread gambling on everyone's phones. This is the one where people are like, enough, maybe. Or
like you're saying, nobody asked for this. I think that people have been asking for sports betting, or had been asking for sports betting, legalized sports betting, decades before it finally showed up. And I mentioned Chris Christie because he was sort of like, he broke the dam, so to speak, when he first legalized this in the state of New Jersey, and then all the other states followed. It was a big deal for the NBA, the NFL specifically, those two organizations, because that they were both vehemently against the idea of gambling, legalized gambling in their particular organizations. And then once it became clear to them just how much money they stood to make from the TV rev share compared to the rev share from the sports books, they were like, oh my God, yes, bring it. But I think that's where it stopped. Like, that's where it started and that's where it stopped. Like, as a sports fan, people were actually asking for an opportunity to bet on the games instead of having to drive to Delaware from DC, or having to drive to New Jersey from New York, or whatever. Like, that's things people were doing to kind of get around the idea of sports betting is not allowed across state lines. There were different online outfits that were just next to the United States that would allow you to gamble from an offshore outlet if you knew the right place to go look, right? The demand was there. There probably wasn't very much demand for people saying, I'd love to lose my money on computerized blackjack. Like, I've played blackjack against the computer on my actual physical computer enough to know the odds are in no way going to favor me, right? Like, when I sit down at a blackjack table in a casino and I've got a human dealer across the table from me, it already feels like I'm being bullied. So I couldn't imagine what it must be like to have the computer deciding on every single toss of the cards who's going to win, and thinking that there's even a 1% chance that I'm going to go up on the house. So it's a terrible idea because nobody wants this.
It speaks directly to addiction now. And so what you're mentioning is a rational mind's approach to gambling. People, if you're playing online blackjack every day, you're probably not thinking about, what is my overall net EV ability to take some money from the house. And there's a book that I've been enjoying. It's called Everybody Loses by Danny Funt. And it is about the I think I'm like 3 or 4 chapters in. It's about how sports betting got legalized and the effects of it. And it's one of those things where I kind of went into it thinking, oh, I know this story. I know where a lot of this goes. And there's sections where I'm able to kind of skim through because I've followed the story. But so much of this is just, it is gross and hilarious and reveals how dysfunctional parts of our government are, where I was expecting a lot of these state legislators to be paid off to legalize sports gambling. But really what a lot of these lobbying groups would just do is bring in retired athletes or bring them on tours of stadiums. And these state legislators, which are, they're listening to someone argue for 2 or 4 hours about where to put a parking lot in a park. Then they have a retired Green Bay Packers quarterback coming on the floor talking about what it was like playing football in the 70s and 80s. Oh, you're loving that. You're happy to see him. You'll take that meeting. If a star athlete wants to meet with you, which they would bring them into the lobby, you'll take that meeting all day. You don't need cash in your pocket. But
here's the other piece of that. And the reason you say yes is because if you're a representative from a local district, you're from the town where that person played. So you grew up watching them play. And Shaquille O'Neal was a big deal to me as a little kid. What do I, as adult me now, not want to do? Disappoint Shaquille O'Neal. So if he comes saying, I want you to approve this thing so that we can do this thing here in your district, I'm a lot more likely to say yes. So psychologically, I understand completely why they're giving it away seemingly for free.
Yes. And with iGaming, it's one of those things where, okay, you've bet on the Dallas Cowboys, but now it's halftime. You've checked how your bet is doing. Maybe play a little blackjack during halftime. And then that kind of behavior is what quickly, I think, can spiral into addictive behaviors. And what people are realizing now is like a lot of kids, now that they're seeing betting widespread, they're betting more with parent accounts. And for, I would say a lot of kids, like they can figure out how to manage it responsibly, but there are a lot of kids that are playing with mom and dad's money, and they learn that gambling is not necessarily something you lose money you've worked for on, which can create some bad behaviors down the road. We're also learning that gambling in and of itself is one of the most dangerous addictions out there compared to like even drugs, alcohol, that type of thing. The National Council on Problem Gambling estimates that 1 in 5 people who have experienced problem gambling behaviors attempt suicide. And that's something where if you are in a drug addiction, I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know. If you're in a drug addiction, maybe there's a light that things, you might be able to get better if you stop using the drug. Mm-hmm. With a gambling addiction, even if you stop gambling, maybe you have a debt overhang on you, or you've lost all your money and things feel hopeless. So even if you stop gambling, there's still an amount of hopelessness there and despair that a lot of these platforms maybe did not create, but they definitely, the widespread adoption of gambling on your phone with isolation and loneliness and people chasing the stimmy button, man, it made things worse. And
what do you think is the solve?
The solve, in my view, is because and to be clear, I'm not trying to come in as a super moralist. Like I've talked about this on the show. I have gambled money on my phone. The solve is, I think there needs to be widespread. Well, number one, gamble in person, as you mentioned, with because it's much harder to hide. It's much easier to hide an addictive behavior if it's only on your phone. You can go bet $3,000 in the bathroom. If you can only bet on sports in person, you have to get in your car. You have to drive to a place. in a lot of these places, some of them will be nice, but you know the crowd that they're going to attract. So for people who are becoming interested in gambling, they go to the counter and they see what's going on around it, the off-track betting kind of vibe, I think. And it also creates friction. So number one, you have to create friction. Number two, I think you have to, the same way that you have to implement the know your customer rule. So these gambling platforms need to have some responsibility to know the income of the customers they have.
I don't know if income makes a difference though. Like,
I think
how many people who had high incomes qualified as accredited investors are losing their shirt in some BDC tied to a private debt fund financing data centers in Dubai that are getting blown up. Like, having gates around it based on your income, I don't think is necessarily. I do really like the idea, though, that you have to put friction around it and you have to actually make it an in-person tactile thing, because we have too many things accessible to us on our phones that are not in our best interest. And I whenever I say stuff like that, people talk about like being a paternalized state or whatever the word is. Like, in a way, if we see something as terrible for society and it's tearing us apart as a society, I think it's on us to make sure that we address that thing, because to the point you were making, when teenagers start getting access to it and going down that rabbit hole that early in their life, that is terrible for the longevity of our society. So yes. I already have that feeling around social media. So anybody listening to this won't be surprised that this is my stance on pocket gaming too. But like, those two things specifically, to me, should be regulated out of teenagers being able to get access to it, if nothing else.
Yeah, I agree. And the sports books would say we can regulate teenagers out of this because we're checking IDs and that type of thing. One thing on income.
Well, you check an ID when I walk in the casino.
Yeah.
So like,
why aren't
we should have.
ID?
Yeah, we should have to have some kind of in the real world aspect of this that keeps it out of the hands that it shouldn't be in.
100%. So I think that's sort of how you can fix it ish. Not fix it, but accept that we allow, I'm going to speak, this is good, spiritually and philosophically, there are demons you let out into the world when you allow things like alcohol, when you allow vices out. In some ways, you shouldn't restrict every single vice. But as a society, you have a responsibility once you realize there is a demon we have let out into the world in the form of widespread gambling. What do we do to address it? And I hope that as we're seeing states push back on iGaming, that's a part of the conversation. One thing this did make me think of, though, and this is somewhat tied to the gambling story, somewhat tied to, I would say, my reporting on the cost of the Iran war, is that one of the themes I'm thinking about is, yes, there is a sticker price for all of these. There's a sticker price if you win a bet. But the cost of that is if you're gambling a lot. Not only in great article in The Atlantic, we don't have time to talk about, but it's this guy's year is a degenerate sports gambler, where The Atlantic gave him $10,000 and said, figure it out for a year and see what you can do. And he approaches it in a very rational way. Then he spirals a bit. And he ends up losing money. And it's one of those
this is
things,
somebody who's super religious and had never gambled before in his life. I think it's worth including that piece of it.
The ethics of how this story happened, I have some questions about.
Yeah.
And basically the impact is, maybe you're even making money. Maybe you have Nate Silver on your side helping you out with this. But a part of this is when you turn on a game, he says, my 10-year-old is asking me, what bet do we have? Mm-hmm. And sorry, it's My Year as a Degenerate Sports Gambler by McKay Coppins. And it was a reminder that even if you go into this with a rational strategy, you can still get burned. And there is a cost to this, even if you're making money. If you're gambling or you're day trading, the cost is your attention in your relationships. And so outside of the sticker price, it's worth considering the outside economic and physiological costs of this. The positive side is, I would say, travel, which there is an economic cost to it, but also a great economic benefit. So some of those things I've been thinking about as we need to end the show because I have to hop off in a second.
Going back to the psychology of it all really quickly. What I thought was interesting was he points out that his very first bet, which was on the Cowboys-Eagles season opener game, he won $20. And his wife, again, super religious family, never gambled before, asks, do you think you'll win enough that we can remodel part of our kitchen? And because he won on his initial bet, the endorphins are going. And I feel like, oh my God, I got to do that again. And that is why they give you such a lopsided first bet when you sign up for these things, because they know if you get that first taste and it's a good one, you'll be back.
Yes. And they've already done the math. The average person who's on there is worth $3,000. I thought I had a final thought, but let's leave it there. You can find me. I'm just going to plug Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at Rick So Slick. Malcolm is at Malcolm on Money. Number one thing you can do to help the show, I would say, is interact with it. Rate it wherever you listen. Leaving a comment on Spotify also helps. We love to hear your thoughts. thistimepod@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Information shared in this recording and by its guests represent the views and opinions of the guests and does not represent the views or opinions of the host. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This content is not, nor is it intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. It is always recommended that you seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your personal financial situation.